There are big political stakes here because Rishi Sunak, obviously, as we know, is currently trying to work out what to do with Suella Braverman as Home Secretary. She's been given a kind of brief stay of execution as Home Secretary, but he has not made a decision on her future. And if these protests go badly, then Suella Braverman will be able to claim, look, I've been vindicated here. And the Prime Minister might look quite vulnerable because her supporters will turn around and say, what was all the fuss about? The Home Secretary was right to say that the police should have acted here and they haven't.
These protests happening today on Armistice Day was very controversial. What's the latest we know? What are the stakes here for Suella Braverman, indeed for Rishi Sunak, with their many comments about these marches beforehand?
Yeah, the stakes are quite high this morning, and obviously there has been a huge amount of build-up to this march, not least because of the political row that's been engulfing the government and Suella Braverman this week. And we're already starting to see signs, unfortunately, that these marches could turn ugly today because there are a number of protesters, several hundred in fact, who appear to be coming from the kind of right-wing marches that were being discussed earlier this week, who have gathered on Whitehall this morning near the Cenotaph. We were expecting that to happen, but the actual sheer numbers are quite concerning, and already we're seeing lots of quite intimidating chanting, people clambering up onto fences and so forth. So,
and to be clear, these are right-wing protesters. These are not pro-Palestine.
Yeah,
protesters.
Exactly. Now, this was the concern that the government, by inflaming tensions this week, they would inadvertently create the conditions by which lots of people would feel compelled to come down to the Cenotaph because they believed that there was going to be, a Palestine march, walking through the Cenotaph on Armistice Day. That obviously isn't happening, but the fact those people there is a concern because we're hoping that the protest later will march as it was instructed to from Hyde Park down to Battersea. But if there is any breakaway groups and they come near Whitehall, that could turn very ugly. And there are big political stakes here because Rishi Sunak, obviously, as we know, is currently trying to work out what to do with Suella Braverman as Home Secretary. She's been given a kind of brief stay of execution as Home Secretary, but he has not made a decision on her future. And if these protests go badly, then Suella Braverman will be able to claim, look, I've been vindicated here. And the Prime Minister might look quite vulnerable because her supporters will turn around and say, what was all the fuss about? The Home Secretary was right to say that the police should have acted here and they haven't. So the stakes are high for them, and also for Sir Mark Rowley, the Met Commissioner. He has defied the government's requests to ban these protests. He said they haven't met the legal threshold, but Rishi Sunak has been very clear that he will hold the Met Commissioner to account for this weekend. So there are big eruptions of violence. I think we could see quite a lot of pressure on him too.
I mean, you could see if there were violence, you can see this sort of going both ways. Some would say perhaps these protesters wouldn't be gathering if Suella Braverman and others hadn't sort of made such a fuss about these protests in the first place. Because, as you say, some others might say, no, this shows that she was absolutely right. Do you think, is there a way that Rishi Sunak could have played this better throughout the week?
Well, there are two schools of thought on what Rishi Sunak should have done. There are a lot of people actually in the cabinet now who are very, very cross at the Home Secretary. I think she is increasingly isolated in her department, and a lot of them believe that the Prime Minister should sack the Home Secretary. Now, the question there is, when does he do so? And there are, again, other strains of thought about, does he do it now and show strength by saying enough's enough? Or does he wait until this march has taken place, assess, if it goes off without much controversy, then she's been proven wrong, and maybe it makes it a bit easier for him. But the other complicating factor is that on Wednesday, the Supreme Court is going to be ruling on the Rwanda plan and whether that's lawful. And the question is, do you want to change your Home Secretary before that ruling has been delivered? Because it will have huge implications either way for the government. If it's legal, then there's a huge operational challenge to deliver what the government's been promising. And if it isn't, do you really want a firebrand right-wing Home Secretary to be sacked and then going on the backbenches, given that we all know that her preference would be for the UK to leave the European Convention on Human Rights, and she would effectively be given the perfect opportunity to set up as an opposition figure on the backbenches and basically launch a leadership contest.
I'm not expecting there to have been a leaky court, but does the government are you aware of the government having any expectation which way that's going to go on Rwanda?
No, they genuinely have no idea. They found out that this ruling was coming on Wednesday as soon as we did. So there have been multiple briefings. Some weeks it's the government's quite confident of victory. Sometimes they're pessimistic. The latest I heard from senior figures around Downing Street was they are quite pessimistic, and they're drawing up contingencies for either event, whether they win or lose. But I think it's just too early to know right now.
And look, there are there's a suspicion that there will be some senior government figures, Tory MPs at any rate, who would make a fuss, perhaps even resign if Suella Braverman was sacked?
Well, yeah, that is the other side of the coin that the PM has to assess now, is how much damage will that do to his authority if he sacks her. Suella Braverman's allies think that she does have a large following on the backbenches. There are suggestions that two more junior people in government, I would say, from what I understand, I won't name them, but I understand they're non-payroll people, which means quite junior.
Yeah.
But beyond that, you're certainly not going to see senior cabinet ministers resigning in protest, because frankly, most of them would like to see her gone. The calculation for the Prime Minister is how many of the backbenchers on the right of the party, the kind of Truss wing of the party, the Boris wing of the party, and increasingly now the Braverman side of the party, how many of those will really take against him on that, and will that galvanise them into becoming increasingly difficult to marshal and whip in the Conservative Party as we head to an election. So that's the calculation he has to make, and I think that's why he's chosen to pause. He hasn't acted quickly. He's weighing up all his options, and I think in the next few days it will become clear whether he decides to sack her or not.